Take a little walk to the edge of town and go across the track. Where the
So why were you asking to give to Dawkins? I mean, if his experience is his own,
No, well, he was responding specifically to your answer, which was, well, God gave the experience to Paul because God knew that Paul would be the guy who could go out there and make Christianity a big global phenomenon and convert billions.
You were making an implication about notoriety
and
or
influence. And so since Dawkins is currently the most influential atheist in the globe, then here's another a possibility for God to take hold of in the same way that you're saying that he did for Saul. Go ahead, convert Dawkins, have Dawkins turn around, write a brand new book saying I was completely wrong in the God delusion, and here's my testimony for Jesus and what have you, and then see what that does to atheism.
And I'd also say that in the case of Dawkins, if he gets a Damascus Road experience as well, that's not going to convince me. Why should it? It's his experience, not mine. Why should somebody convert or believe something based on somebody else's experience? Ever.
Well, let me talk about the first thing.
Okay.
I know this is not exactly the same thing because this person didn't become a Christian per se. But does the fact that Anthony Flew now believes in God or in some kind of God convince you of the reliability of theism in any respect?
No.
If we gave it to Dawkins, if he became a Christian, what would that do to atheism? Well, one of probably the foremost atheist philosopher converting to some form of deism, and that didn't do very much for atheism. So
I
why should we
agree.
believe Dawkins?
I agree, didn't. And
My point about Dawkins was only responding to your one implication about notoriety and influence. That's it. I don't think that should matter, and I would never think that it should matter. It was only in response to that one point.
I mean, I think we also do need to keep into account that Paul was a mass murderer. Again, he was basically a terrorist.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think in this particular case, giving the information to Paul not only stopped him from killing people, but it also made it so that Christianity still exists. I mean, I think if we gave it to Dawkins, why do I keep saying we? I think if God gave that information to Dawkins, it wouldn't affect the fact that Christianity would still exist 100 years from now. I really don't believe that.
Well, let me ask you this. I realize we're going back into a presumption of yours that I disagree with, but what Saul was doing was killing Christians.
Right.
And do you believe there's a hell?
I believe there is some kind of hell, yes. I'm not sure what it's like, but yeah.
Okay, in any case, somebody spends eternity either in oblivion or in eternal torment or something.
Yes.
Okay. What Saul was doing could be viewed as sending Christians to meet their Maker. What Dawkins and the rest of us are doing, in anybody that we deconvert, or not that that's necessarily a goal, but we are specifically preventing people and seeking to prevent people from accepting something that you think sends them to heaven, and the rejection of which, maybe, I'm not sure on all your criteria, would potentially send them to hell. So wouldn't it be more beneficial for God to start converting these major atheists than it would be for him to convert Saul?
Well, I don't know. I think in many ways now, especially, and now that Christianity has been set and the foundations have been laid, I think that mostly the work on behalf of coming to God is not his doing, as in that it is our doing, that we can choose to,
I completely agree there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think if God were to, flat out show up to Dawkins or just any of these mainstream atheists, I don't know. I mean, if all of them just converted, I really don't think it would be that much of a huge impact on what's going on in the world. I mean, it may save some people, but I think God's main intention is, to bring, not necessarily to bring, but to have people come on their own accord. And I think that would probably violate some kind of sentiment that he has at this point. I'm not sure. I don't know. But, yeah.
Well,
that's all I have.
What reason could you possibly think of that God wouldn't just reveal himself directly to everyone?
Just based on the fact that, I could say that God has already revealed himself to everyone in certain senses. I mean, I believe...
Well, forget all the other certain senses. Let's talk about revealing himself to us. I am God.
Russell made the point yesterday on the Nonprofits, and I think this is well made, even though it's based on some amusing fiction. As Douglas Adams pointed out, when the Vogon destructor fleet shows up, they broadcast a message to everybody on Earth that is completely unambiguous, that is understood by everybody. We're sorry, but your planet's been scheduled for destruction, and you have 8 minutes, whatever. Are the Vogons more powerful than God? Couldn't God do something like that?
I'm not sure if God necessarily would want to do something like that.
Well, okay. My question is that, assuming that a God could do something like that, which I think, at least by my previous understanding of the Christian God I used to believe in, and what I hear as far as the capabilities of God from most believers, I think that definition of God would include the ability to do this. Now, yes. Given that ability, my concept of God previously, and the concept of God that I hear presented by so many Christians that call into the show and write, is a God who actually has, as a desire, the salvation and love and respect of everybody.
Right.
So why, given those two things, would he not do something like that?
I think one thing I could say would be that, all right, let's say that God shows up just like that fleet or whatever, and says, gives an unambiguous, writes in the clouds, I am Jesus, worship me. And everyone comes to believe that God exists. Mm-hmm. I don't think necessarily that his primary concern is for us to believe that he exists. I think his primary concern is just to have a relationship with him and to...
Well, wouldn't that entail believing he exists? Why?
Yeah, certainly, but I think he cares more about the fact that we would actually, worship him or do something.
But I'm fine with that.
I think believing he exists... I think if everybody believed he exists, I think that would kind of create some kind of artificial situation in which, hey, now that we know that there's a God here who's...
No. I can almost kind of make your point for you in this. If God pulled the Vogon trick, I would no longer be an atheist. I would believe that a God exists. That, however, does not mean that I would worship that God or follow his instructions or think he was a good guy or any of those other things. Now, it's possible that, much like the person with a gun to their head, that with the direct knowledge of this God's existence and the threat of hell, that I and others might claim that, but that would be absurd, because surely this God should be able to see that I'm just faking it. However, the knowledge of the existence of a God does not necessitate the worship or adoration or respect of somebody else. And even within the mythology of Christianity, you have clear examples of this. Satan, for one. Certainly Satan, in that mythology, absolutely knows with no doubt that a God exists, yet does not choose to worship.
Right. What I was basically saying is that even if God did show up, what good would that do? Honestly,
it would change the focus. If somebody sends you a letter and says, "I want you to love me," and that's it, you don't know that person, could you ever make any kind of assessment about whether or not you could love them? Don't you have to know that person first? If a God's goal is for people to love and worship him, first of all, I'd say that those are things that are earned. But also, I cannot love or worship something that I don't even believe exists. So at a minimum, there's a minimum level of information that needs to be presented to everybody in order for them to be able to rationally make a decision about whether or not, what they feel about this thing. Now, even as a fictional character, I can tell you that the character of God in a Bible is, if it's accurate, fiction or not, is not the type of individual that I would respect or worship. But if that God were to appear and say, "I exist," the scope of the conversation would change completely. Not to one of whether or not it exists, but whether or not this is the sort of being anybody should respect.
Walk to the edge of town and go across the track where the viaduct